Our scripture reading this morning is from Luke 21, verses 5 to 19. Some of his disciples began talking about the majestic stonework of the temple and the memorial decorations on the walls. But Jesus said, "The time is coming when all these things will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another." "Teacher," they asked, "when will all this happen? What sign will show us that these things are about to take place?" He replied, "Don't let anyone mislead you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and saying, 'The time has come.' But don't believe them. And when you hear of wars and insurrections, don't panic. Yes, these things must take place first, but the end won't follow immediately." Then he added, "Nations will go to war against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and there will be famines and plagues in many lands, and there will be terrifying things and great miraculous signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, there will be a time of great persecution. You will be dragged into synagogues and prisons, and you will stand trial before kings and governors because you are my followers. But this will be your opportunity to tell them about me. So don't worry in advance about how to answer the charges against you, for I will give you the right words and such wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to reply or refute you. Even those closest to you, your parents, brothers, relatives, and friends will betray you. They will even kill some of you. And everyone will hate you because you are my followers. But not a hair of your head will perish. By standing firm, you will win your souls."
Thank you. Remember last Sunday I prayed for the people that God would draw to fill these spaces? Since then I've had 2 phone calls from people who said, "I've been thinking of coming to your church. Could I come?" So if you meet people in the foyer that you've not met before, let's make sure that they don't get out of here without somebody talking to them. Would that be okay? This morning's presentation is going to be in 2 parts. First is a sermon, and then November is typically a month when we remember and pray for the persecuted church. So after the message, we're going to sing that song that Andrew just played, and then we will have a short presentation. Dave Weeb is going to help us, and we want to pray for people who are suffering for their faith. So in our scripture this morning, as you just heard, Jesus tells the disciples that their world is going to fall apart, and then it's going to get worse. Aren't you glad you came to church this morning? I mean, you could have slept in, you could have had another cup of coffee. I'm sure there's a lot of things you could have done, but you got up, you got your coat on, and you came to church to hear bad news. In October of 2005, we heard the news of a terrible earthquake in northern Pakistan. The damage was extensive. In all, 75 to 85,000 people died. That December, I joined a group in northern Pakistan, the Kashmir. That's the disputed area between Pakistan and India that's been in the news recently, to help with some relief efforts. We worked in a field hospital, and then when we went into the valley to help a particular family, the head of the household, the man, led us to this. And he said, "This is my house." Next to the pile of stones was a makeshift tent affair. Inside I saw 2 beds pushed together. Based on the number of pillows on the bed, I gathered that the whole extended family huddled together to keep warm on those cold nights, because we were at altitude. This was in the mountains, and it's December, right? Winter is coming. So we started clearing the area. We dug out stones and timbers that could be reused. For 2 whole days we worked while the family stood in silence and watched. But on the 3rd day, they joined in. Everyone, the men, the women, the children. This little kid was so enthusiastic with his Mattock, we had to watch our fingers. On the 3rd day, this devastated, shell-shocked, demoralized family had found a spark of hope. I want you to keep this image in your mind as we go. Our scriptures describe the disciples gazing at the temple. They're awed by the architecture and the decorations, and it was impressive. The main building was actually fairly small. You could fit that building into the infield of a baseball stadium. But the courtyard around it, with the pillars and the porches and the separate courtyards, could fill about 10 football fields. The retaining wall around it was made out of stones the size of shipping containers. I mean, they were 40 feet long. Massive. How they moved them, I have no idea. The eastern wall was covered with plates of gold to reflect the light of the rising sun. And if you looked at it too long, you could go blind. The whole thing was still under construction while the disciples were there on this particular day. Marveling at the beautiful architecture and the carved decorations, there were grapevines and bunches of grapes the size of a human person above the gates. The whole courtyard had 13 gates. The largest was a bronze gate that was so heavy it took 20 men to open it. This was King Herod's signature piece, his legacy, and it was magnificent. No wonder the disciples stared. What the disciples saw was solid, permanent, a temple that would be the symbol of Jewish identity and the center of their worship. No matter the wind or the political weather, every year tens of thousands of pilgrims came to this temple. As Debbie Thomas puts it in her online essay, and I'm borrowing some of her stuff today, what the disciples see is an architectural marvel, yes, but it's also the biggest, boldest, and most unshakable symbol of God's presence they're capable of imagining. Here in this temple was God's presence on display for the whole world to see. Jesus looked at the temple too, but looking and seeing are 2 different things. What Jesus saw wasn't permanent at all. He foresaw a massive ruin, loss, not glory, change, not permanence. None of this will last, he said. It will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another. Wow. Talk about a conversation stopper. Throwing cold water on their enthusiasm. And the disciples are stunned at what he says. They skip the first question I would have asked, like how could that possibly happen? They go straight to when? And will there be signs? How will we know? How do we get ready? And that's our question too, right? We want to know about what's going to happen. And if things get difficult, what should we look for? How do we prepare? And then Jesus launches into something that seems to come straight out of one of our apocalypse movies about the end of the world. Nations and kingdoms will declare war against each other. There'll be great earthquakes and famines and epidemics in many lands, terrifying things and miraculous signs in the heavens. And through all that, there will be these self-proclaimed messiahs, saviors who offer you easy answers and quick fixes if you will only follow them. Don't believe them. They're deceivers. Don't follow them. Oh, and you will be persecuted. Even those closest to you, family, fathers, brothers, close friends, will betray you, and some of you will be killed. And everyone will hate you because of your allegiance to me, Jesus says, but not a hair of your head will perish. Wait a minute. That doesn't even make any sense. Some of you will be killed, but your hair will look great. What does that even mean? Here's the thing. As amazing as the temple was, God doesn't live in a stone house, no matter how big or how beautiful it is. And we might add, you can't put God in a box, and you can't put God in a book either. As Dave Weeb referenced this morning, we believe in the inerrant Word, and the Word has a name. His name is Jesus. And these are words about the Word. But we couldn't fit you into a book, no matter how many pretty pictures. Our thoughts about God are always too small. How could they be otherwise? And that is why sometimes our boxes, our temples for God, fall apart. Our certainties collapse. Let me give you an example. What happens to our faith and our obedience to God when God is silent, precisely at those times we need to hear God most? Mother Teresa had an ecstatic vision of Jesus, calling her to work with the poorest of the poor. And for the rest of her life, through all the difficulties and challenges of her work, she never heard from Jesus again, ever. Or what happens to our prayers when disaster strikes? Our youngest daughter has given me permission to share this story. When she was in high school, her closest friend got cancer. And during those final weeks, she actually made an Afghan to bring to her friend. And then she would go to the hospital, crawl into the hospital bed beside her friend, and they would read each other jokes. Anything to distract from the pain. Shortly after that friend died, another friend died also of cancer. And then a third friend died by suicide. And everything she thought she knew about God collapsed. Unable to pray, she would light a candle and put it in the window of her upstairs bedroom, hoping that somehow, maybe, God would notice. My guess is that some of you have had that kind of earth-shattering, life-altering event, maybe within the last year, maybe a little longer ago, when everything collapsed. Parents lose a child. A spouse dies. A marriage blows up. A health diagnosis. A career crumbles. A business goes under. Everything you were confident about, all that you thought you knew about your family, your future, even your faith is shaken. When those things happen, you don't know what to think or believe anymore. The temple has collapsed. The foundations have crumbled. The glory is gone. The landscape is unrecognizable. Everything you built is in ruins. How do you survive the cold nights? How do you pick up the pieces? Where do you even start? Quoting Thomas once again, Jesus sees all that must break and buckle and end before new life and new hope will emerge. He sees the necessity of death before the promise of resurrection. Great, thanks. I'm going to need some more. So, when our world collapses, what do we do? In the second part of our reading, Jesus gives us some insights of how to respond when the walls come tumbling down with calm strength and faithful witness. When you see all these things happen, when nations make war, when the earth shakes, don't panic. Don't let fear consume you. Don't bunker down with canned food and stored water supplies. And when imposter messiahs promise easy answers or quick fixes, when people say, look here or look there, remember that God is often not where people say God is. And don't neglect to bear witness. When answers are demanded of you, consider it an opportunity to talk about Jesus. So avoid hasty, knee-jerk judgments. Be imaginative, not immature. Make peace. Choose hope. Cultivate patience. And incarnate love as the world reels and changes. Expect things to get hard. And then expect them to get harder. Endure even when they do. Know that God is near no matter what the world looks or feels like. Speak the truth, trusting that God's Spirit is alive and present in our acts of bearing witness. Be faithful until the end, because God is still, always and everywhere, a God of love. This is the great challenge of the gospel, not simply to bear the apocalypse, but to bear it well. To bear it with the courage, calm, and faith Jesus calls us to practice in the scripture. Earlier we sang, "Blessed be your name." He gives and takes away. When I'm in the desert place, in the wilderness, blessed be your name. When our world collapses, what if we would imagine this not as the end, but as a beginning? What if what's happening isn't death, but birth? Yes, the things we were confident about have crumbled, but what could grow up in their place? And through it all, Jesus' promise still holds. The choir sang, "He shall feed his flock like a shepherd, he shall gather them in his arms." Whether we hear Jesus' voice or not, whether we are aware of it or not, God has not abandoned us. When they crucified Jesus, that was the end. The end of everything. But on the third day, hope returned. Death couldn't hold Jesus, and it will not hold us. Even in death, we will be safe.